A guy contacted me explaining that he is the foreign minister of a government in exile. No, this is not about an internet scam. This is real. He represents a group often referred to as the Uyghurs, a peoplehood facing hellish repression by China. He listens to this show and said he would welcome a chance to talk about misinformation in the media surrounding international crises and how hard it is to get the truth out there. I looked into him and said, absolutely. I just need to figure out which week. And then this story became very timely. You wouldn't know that from big media, which has missed all of it. But the nightmare reality of what China is up to links directly to big developments in America and the world, including the war in Iran, US trade, immigration, asylum, and so much more. It speaks to the financial drivers behind left-wing groups and streamers radicalizing people. It speaks to the insanity of US politicians, particularly Democrats, but not exclusively, fixating on the world's stupidest cause, hating Israel, while ignoring actual genocide and repression of Muslim people in a huge piece of actually occupied land. People who do not keep trying to slaughter those in neighboring countries. It also links to the screaming hypocrisy of New York City's mayor just the other day. I learned so much from this interview, and I bet you will too. It'll help you see how a massive global force is reshaping what the world talks about with big help from the media. Here's just a little piece of what you'll hear.
The hypocrisy that this exposes, that even like the Muslim world's, oh, we care about our oppressed Muslims, brothers and sisters, it's all fake. It's only when it's tied to their own interest. So they've sold out their own religion, their own values, etc., for China's money. And this is what we're seeing. All of these people on the left, they're like, we're against colonialism, we're against imperialism. The biggest imperialist power right now is China.
We'll talk about so much that gets way too little attention. At one point, he mentions this co-sleeping thing China is doing, sending in Chinese government cadres, these government workers, to literally sleep with Uyghurs, particularly in homes where the men have been abducted. And that's just scratching the surface. Also today, of course, some of the latest other news failures for you on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. So great to have you. My name is Josh Lebs, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, the only thing that fact checks the news. At the top, I usually give you a bunch of info, but I'll tell you there's so much to get into with this interview today. So I'm going to get straight into setting it up. The man who contacted me, his name is Salih Hudayar. His official title is Foreign Minister of the East Turkestan Government in Exile. Here's what he explained.
China occupied our country back in 1949. It has been colonizing it. Our government in exile was established to serve as a continuation of our previous government, the East Turkestan Republic, and to represent our people on the international stage, specifically their struggle to restore our independence and national sovereignty.
There is a democratic system in which members of this peoplehood around the world vote, and that's how he has his current title. Governments in exile do exist, but what counts as one is nebulous. The United States does not officially recognize this as a government in exile. Whether you think of him as being part of an organization or a government in exile, his points are still equally valid. He shared so much information with me as we went through this, and part of the challenge is that China is so repressive and keeps so much information hidden that when it comes to fact-checking, it can be impossible to authenticate information. But here's what I found consistently. With all this stuff he kept telling me, I would go look for sources about it. And I found that people who have escaped and groups that work with Uyghurs have found that these things are the case. Like at one point he refers to, and there are things in here that'll be tough to hear, but this is just one example. You'll hear him refer to organ harvesting. There's independent reporting saying that that is being done to Uyghurs. In the newsletter, which comes along with this show, I'm going to give you lots of links that you can see for yourself. So I'm not going to pause after every assertion throughout this interview, and I will follow up this episode with further updates. But I want to start off with the part of the world we're talking about. It's big. East Turkestan is 4 times the size of California. It's 1/6 of the total land mass that China claims. There are tens of millions of people. The Chinese government officially says there are 25 million people, but some Uyghur activists say it's actually much more than that, maybe 35. It may have been 40 million before China launched what many people and groups call a genocide. The United States calls it a genocide. Uyghurs are overwhelmingly Muslim. Going back, the region had various cultures, but there was a point, as in much of the world, in which Islamist empires took over and Islamized regions, forcing Islam onto huge populations. Okay, so you've heard me say East Turkestan. That is not the name you hear in the news. China saw to it that people stop referring to it that way. China has, to a large extent, let people get away with still calling Tibet, Tibet, even though that is not the Chinese name for it and China claims Tibet. However, China has used extreme pressure to prevent anyone from referring to East Turkestan as East Turkestan. Here is what Salih explains.
We didn't have a Dalai Lama figure, so the Chinese colonial term Xinjiang, meaning new territory or new dominion, also has a translation of meaning the colony. It has become the predominant term in international media and international usage because of China's diplomatic pressure. Because when you prevent governments from talking about the issue, journalists base it off of what governments say. So that's essentially what becomes the norm in that sense.
Like the occupied territories, it's the same thing. It's once you get people in government to start using a term, the media follows suit, and then it's cyclical. Then more people in the government are people who grew up hearing the media, and that's the only term they know.
Yes.
What are the biggest media failures that you see when it comes to coverage or lack of coverage of this group of people you represent?
Well, one, the media always portrays us as so-called Chinese Muslims. We are ethnically Indo-European and Turkic. Our language is Turkic. Our culture is Turkic. The second is calling us ethnic minorities. We are still the majority in our homeland despite decades of colonization. And media and governments, they always address the symptoms of the issue. Uyghurs are being arrested, they're being imprisoned, they're being tortured, they're being harvested for their organs, their language and culture is being eroded, but nobody talks about why it's happening. And that lies in the root of China's colonial occupation of East Turkestan. So this genocide that we are facing now was premeditated state policy from the moment that they came in. In fact, the Chinese general Wang Jin, who was sent to occupy East Turkestan, he wrote to Mao stating, we need to thoroughly wipe these people out. And Mao was like, hold your horses. They make up over 90% of this territory. We can't just wipe them out right now. So Mao was like, bide your time. But the intent to wipe us out was always there. So gradually, they began this campaign. The Chinese claim that the Chinese have risen from less than 5% to over 42% as of 2020. The greatest demographic settler colonialism in the modern era, whereas our population declined from over 92% to just about 55%. At the current rate, this is going to continue. So this is one thing that the international community fails to address. They want to talk about colonialism, they want to talk about genocide, but they ignore the biggest example. We are the largest colony, the largest occupied territory in both terms of population and land area.
Yeah, they only want to talk about that if it helps them in their anti-Israel agenda. They don't actually have concerns about those issues. It must be frustrating for you to see people who claim to stand for human rights ignore your issue, and not even just ignore, but be pro-communist, and in some cases pro-China.
It just shows the hypocrisy of these peoples. They only care about whoever gives them incentives, what they can benefit from. We've been betrayed, we've been sold out by the international community as a whole, especially by our own Turkic or by our own Muslim brothers. all these Muslim countries, they know what's happening. Let's just say, forget about us from the ethnic and national perspective. Let's just talk about it solely from the religious perspective. Over 16,000 mosques have been destroyed since 2014. Millions of Qurans and Islamic texts have been burned. Even saying Assalamu alaikum or peace be upon you is viewed as a sign of extremism. You can't pray, you can't fast, you can't do anything. You have Chinese officials coming and living in your home, grading you for 2 weeks a month. This is something that the Chinese state media themselves promoted, saying we're building community ties and relations, we're building a family. And they'll offer you a cigarette and they'll be like, smoke this. If you refuse, you're an extremist. They'll offer you alcohol and they'll be like, drink this. If you refuse, you're an extremist. They'll offer you pork, and if you refuse, you're an extremist. Many of the men had already been taken. So our women are left with these Chinese male, and they even on state media, they put our women be under the same covers as these Chinese government family members that they sent to us. The hypocrisy that this exposes, that even like the Muslim world's, oh, we care about our oppressed Muslims, brothers and sisters, it's all fake. It's only when it's tied to their own interest. So they've sold out their own religion, their own values, etc., for China's money. And this is what we're seeing. All of these people on the left, they're like, we're against colonialism, we're against imperialism. The biggest imperialist power right now is China. If in like Europe, just because some individual European burned one Quran, the entire Muslim world is against it. Yet they remain a blind eye deliberately to what China is doing.
They just don't bother with China, or is there some kind of backroom dealing involving money that's leading these groups to ignore this stuff?
Oh, there are absolutely backroom dealings. It's because of the financial and political and economic incentives and connections that they have. For example, China essentially buys influence in the OIC. It's been buying a lot of influence through the Belt and Road Initiative.
Okay, I'm jumping in here. Those two things he just mentioned should be in the news all the time, but of course they're not. The OIC is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It includes all the Arab states, the Arab League, and dozens of other Muslim states and some non-Muslim states. The OIC has deepening economic ties with China. This is strategic. China has worked to get these countries economically dependent on China, and they then look the other way from any and all issues with the government. There is a think tank called the Center for Uyghur Studies in Virginia. The executive director recently said the OIC was created to safeguard the rights, dignity, and interests of Muslim communities worldwide. So its professed unwavering support for China on Xinjiang is a betrayal of its founding principle. Seeing China as a friend of the Muslim world is clear hypocrisy. Meanwhile, the Belt and Road Initiative is China's massive effort to build infrastructure and new trade routes. Those are being reshaped by multiple forces right now, including the Iran war. In a nutshell, this initiative is a mechanism to get more parts of the world tied to and dependent on China economically. Salih says China uses this financial leverage. It's no wonder that all these governments and organizations refuse to call China out, and they basically follow China's lead by keeping the world focused on something else.
It denies our right to self-determination. It commits genocide against us, but then it touts about Palestinian self-determination at the UN, saying, oh, we support the Palestinians. Israel is bad. It deflects its own atrocities by even outside of the governments. We're talking about organizations or individuals, Muslim scholars, etc. The same thing. The Chinese government pays them to come to China, puts them on this tour, says, look at these Chinese Muslims. And then in our case, they said, oh, these are, Western aligned terrorists, Western imperialists trying to undermine us.
Here's what he's saying there. There are groups of Chinese Muslims, people who are Chinese and Muslim. China uses them for propaganda. Meanwhile, it claims that Uyghurs seeking independence are some sort of Western-backed imperialists, which objectively makes no sense, but that is what China says, and people on the left echo it.
This is the narrative that they play. Even here in the West, in terms of the left, A lot of people like Hasan Piker and etc., they're brought into China, given all these lavish incentives. God knows what else the Chinese are doing behind the scene. This is the propaganda that they do. And Hasan Piker himself, he's Turkish. He knows very well how Turks view our issue, but he doesn't care. All these people are for sale. They're ready to sell their moral, ethical convictions. This is why many of these protests, these other issues, these leftist organizations that are operating both here in the United States and elsewhere, you won't be surprised when you hear about that it's being funded by China in part. It's been buying a lot of influence and essentially silencing the entire world while trying to provoke other things, push other issues, even if it has to stir it up itself to take the global attention away from our issue.
He mentions these leftist organizations. Increasingly, this is being exposed. Left-wing groups and figures getting money from China, particularly through certain intermediaries. It's not even deeply hidden. This has been recognized by both parties in Washington. The Biden administration called out how China was doing this, and now new information keeps coming to light. Here was Representative Nicole Maliotakis of New York at a congressional hearing just the other day.
We continue to see examples of foreign actors exploiting nonprofit organizations to interfere in our political process, to fuel anti-Semitism, in some cases even support or promote terrorism. We have also seen an increase in these organizations coordinating with and receiving support from individuals connected to the Chinese Communist Party. One of these organizations is Code Pink.
Code Pink, ugh. They are a far-left organization, extremely anti-Semitic, and they turn everything that ever happens into their latest anti-Israel screeds. They're very performative. They hold rallies and scream in Congress, literally. Like, they'll show up to hearings and start screaming, generally get whatever headlines they want. They claim to be pro-peace, but even the New York Times has pointed out what they really are. This was a report in 2023. The Times traced money connected to a U.S. tech mogul, bazillionaire, named Neville Roy Singham. The Times reported that he works with the Chinese government and is at the center of a lavishly funded influence campaign that defends China and pushes its propaganda. This is more from the article. Code Pink once criticized China's rights record, but now defends its internment of the predominantly Muslim Uyghurs, which human rights experts have labeled a crime against humanity. These leftist groups, including Code Pink, pretend that everything you heard about the Uyghurs is just a big lie. Simultaneously, China prevents expats, people who have escaped East Turkestan, prevents them around the world from mobilizing for the Uyghurs. We'll discuss how coming up. Plus, there are some Uyghur Islamist terrorists, how they factor in. "60 Minutes correspondent Scott Pelley was kicked out of the network after a ridiculous performative attack on the show's new boss. Pelley then made new allegations against the network. I have questions, and I want to see evidence of what he's claiming. After all, I've reported on this show about massive failures by CBS and 60 Minutes itself under the previous owners. Somehow, Scott Pelley never complained publicly about those. Meanwhile, a woman at the center of a New York Times piece is calling out the paper, saying it was a setup. What she describes is journalistic malpractice. That story involved the candidate Democrats are backing for the Senate in Maine, despite his long record of despicable behaviors. These are examples of the kinds of things that pop up during the week between episodes of this show. I jump right into the newsletter. I tell you what you should know instead of the media spin. And I point you directly to episodes of this show in which I have covered these things. The newsletter is for everyone. It's free. You can also choose to become a paid subscriber. Then you get lots of extra content, including edited hyperlinked transcripts. You also get the entire backlog of hundreds of newsletters packed with information for you on dozens of topics. Anytime you want to find the facts, just open up the newsletter, click the little search button at the top, and type in the topic. I also show my paid subscribers how to access big legacy media with no paywalls for free legally. This show relies on your supports. So take the 1 minute to sign up now. There are different options for your budget. I see every new sign up and I'm super grateful. You'll find the links in the show notes or just go to They Stand Corrected on Substack. Freedom House says China conducts the most sophisticated, global, and comprehensive campaign of transnational repression in the world. It has various tactics. It uses surveillance, harassment, intimidation, and more. The country uses its influence to get Uyghurs sent back when they seek asylum in other countries. And not even just sent back to China directly. Some people from East Turkestan managed to escape to other nearby countries, which then agreed to arrest them and send them back to China at China's insistence. Some of them escaped from these other countries and got places, including the United States. China and other countries sometimes send people to literally chase them down in these other countries. Last year, the United States took action in an effort to crack down on that. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced a visa restriction on current or former foreign government officials responsible for or complicit in the forced return of Uyghurs. But chasing down is only one of many ways China goes after Uyghurs. It also makes clear that if a Uyghur person abroad takes part in efforts for independence, the Chinese government will take it out on their relatives back at home.
The Chinese government controls our people both inside and outside East Turkestan. Those inside East Turkestan, they're under constant surveillance, they're imprisoned, they're enslaved. But even outside East Turkestan, using transnational repression, the Chinese government prevents our people from even mobilizing. There's this constant fear, and they're essentially holding our family members hostage back in East Turkestan.
So you have personally had family members disappeared?
Yeah, I had over 100 relatives taken into the concentration camps and prisons. About half of them have been sentenced anywhere from 5 years to life in prison. 4 have been killed. The others, we don't know. Then the rest of our people are, in these many countries, we're highly impoverished. A lot of these folks are refugees. They're still, trying to make way. So there's not a whole lot of funding in terms of us being able to sustain our own movement, especially on that level.
There are Uyghur Islamist terrorists in the world. China says it's fighting to prevent further radicalization and trying to assimilate Muslim people so that they won't become radicals like that. But this is not a case in which a Muslim population has chosen leaders who are Islamist terrorists, not remotely. The people of East Turkestan don't get to choose their leaders at all. What China is doing, this is actual occupation. And this is a powerful reminder of how wrong the media and the world have been for decades when they've been calling Gaza and the West Bank occupied. I encourage you to listen to episode 1 of this podcast. If you haven't heard it, you'll be shocked. Arab populations in those regions have their own governments, their own territory. Uyghurs don't. Salih says China has been trying to link Uyghurs to Islamist terrorism.
This is a deliberate strategy. After the fall of the Soviet Union, our independence movement resurged. If you look at headlines from that era, the 1990s, you will find media reports saying that Uyghurs are fighting for independence. The ancient warriors who defeated Alexander the Great are taking up their battle against China. The new fight between David and Goliath. These were the headlines. And our leaders at that time made it very clear our goal, our struggle is solely about national liberation. It has nothing to do with Islamic fundamentalism or extremism. And so China freaked out because we were getting media attention. We were, our leaders were meeting with Western governments. So in 1996, the Chinese government's, the CCP's Standing Committee Politburo, Central Committee, top 7 members led by Jiang Zemin, held a top secret meeting on preventing East Turkestan's independence. And they issued a 10-point directive disseminated to all their intelligence and security agencies on preventing our independence movement and crushing it. And immediately they began arresting nationalists. But at the same time, they let a handful of Uyghur Islamists who were imprisoned supposedly imprisoned, we believe they're Chinese government operatives, into Pakistan, China's all-weather ally, where the Pakistani Islamic Party helps them create a so-called East Turkestan Islamic Party, and that is the one that the Chinese government has been using as a scapegoat to undermine and demonize our independence movement. And so this is the playbook that China has been using. So yes, there has been Uyghurs that have ended up in, Afghanistan, all that. Many of them, the top ones, are Chinese intelligence operatives, whereas the average fighters are probably naive Uyghurs who come from the villages. They lure them through the idea of, oh, you're going to receive training to one day return back to liberate East Turkestan. So every time China needs to show that it's facing a terrorism threat, this group comes out and starts declaring jihad against the United States, against Israel, against all of these other countries, which have nothing to do with us, nothing to do with our cause. If you want to go declare jihad, you should be declaring jihad against those who are actually committing genocide against you, those who are actually colonizing you, occupying your country.
Yeah, you're talking about China when you say that.
Yeah, rather than trying to be like, oh, we need to establish a global caliphate.
When I was researching for this episode, some of the best information I found about the Uyghurs comes from the United States Holocaust Museum, the Middle East Forum, the Anti-Defamation League, and the American Jewish Committee. A post there had this headline: "The Uyghurs' plight is a humanitarian crisis. More must be done to help." These groups have been calling out this stuff for years. All of these organizations have a lot in common. They understand Jewish history and Israel and the fight against Islamist terrorism.
I've had a lot of engagements with Jewish organizations, and they have been the most vocal supporters for our cause because, one, they understand what it feels like to undergo a genocide. Y'all went through the Holocaust, so that in itself compels many Jews to have a sense of responsibility to speak out. So we've received a lot of solidarity from Jewish people and Jewish organizations. And I can't say the same for Muslim organizations, unfortunately. I've been kicked out of a mosque for asking that they pray. At the very least, I didn't say support independence. I said at least pray for an end to the genocide of our people. This was during Ramadan. I said, we can't even celebrate Ramadan in East Turkestan. And immediately they're like, this is politics. And I said, how is it politics? You let the Palestinians come and do their thing. That's not politics. You let the Kashmiris come and do their thing. That's not politics. But when we try to ask you for a single prayer, all of a sudden it's politics. Like, this is the hypocrisy. I've been kicked out of 2 mosques here in the Washington, D.C. area because of this issue. And they're like, oh, you're talking bad about China. China is supportive of Palestine. China is supportive of this. China is supportive of that. Yeah. Why is China doing that? So it can whitewash its own crimes over here. It wants to pressure the Western world. And these people don't understand.
The same effort is also happening in our domestic politics. China is involved in a ton of lobbying efforts, and it's happening in our universities. I mentioned earlier how timely this conversation is. Well, there is a new study tracing China's influence campaign in higher education. I saw one little report about it on ABC's website, but otherwise the media pretty much ignored it. It's from the Network Contagion Research Institute, which explores threats to America's youth, civic integrity, and national security. I reached out to the head of that group because I want you to have a copy of it if you want to see it for yourself. So you will find it in the newsletter. It cites hundreds of millions of dollars linked to China poured into U.S. colleges and universities in recent years. It's no shock that there are no giant protests on college campuses about everything Salih is telling us here. While there have been and continue to be these protests based on imaginary things that these kids believe Israel is doing. China is part of this, along with Qatar and Iran.
They're turning our academic institutions against the American government, against American society, against our allies. China's endgame is to weaken all of these countries to where they can essentially become the dominant global superpower without any effective resistance.
All of this brings us to Zohran Mamdani. He recently became the first mayor of New York City to not attend the Israel Day parade. Lots of other officials did, including the New York State Attorney General Letitia James, the state comptroller, and the city comptroller, all Democrats. Mamdani said he would not attend and cited his feelings about the Israeli government. The government. Meanwhile, there's this. Mamdani did take part in this celebration of China and Chinese Lunar New Year. Here's what Salih says about that.
If you look at the groups organizing this event, all of them are linked to the United Front Work Department, like the intelligence branch of the Chinese Communist Party uses to influence and co-opt organizations, peoples, including foreigners, to align with the CCP. So just you being there itself is a win for them because that means they succeeded in getting you to align with one of their events. Secondly, it's political because who else is there? You're going to have, at the very least, the Chinese consul general, etc. So by being there, you are sending a political message that we align with the Chinese government, we align with the CCP. And because you're not going there to criticize what China is doing, you're essentially approving of that. You're approving of the colonization happening in East Turkestan and Tibet. You're approving of the occupation. You're approving of the genocide. So that's the message that Mamdani or any other official who attends these events sends by being there.
Understanding all this can give us a whole new way to see what the media's failure is doing to us and the world. That's coming up. Going into this break, the East Turkestan National Anthem. Think of an organization you're a part of. Would it benefit from an event or webinar about sifting fact from fiction? I do speaking events around the country and around the world, in person and online. Get information at my website, joshlevs.com. Just click bookings. Even what you've heard here doesn't cover everything China is doing to Uyghurs. The list keeps going. I'll share more from Salih in future episodes. It's impossible to know how many people have been killed because so many have been disappeared. And in case you're wondering, yes, that is an expression now, to be disappeared. It's been used by the National Institutes of Health and the Holocaust Museum and the LA Times. I searched recent news articles to see where it's been used. The most recent one I found was from the Jerusalem Post, actually, about nearly 2,000 Jewish people who were among the disappeared in Argentina's dirty war. I've told you how way more people see headlines than actual reports. I ran a headline search for the past 12 months at the New York Times. Uyghurs came up a total of 3 times, and all 3 stories were about U.S. politics. Meanwhile, the Times delivers a daily onslaught of headlines obsessing over Israel and Gaza, always portraying Israel in the worst possible light. This guy, Eitan Fishberger, noted this on social media this past weekend. All 3 top stories on the Times website were about Israel, all of them inverting reality. Here's just one example. There was a terrorist attack in Israel, but the Times was headlining Israel doing these horrible things. You wouldn't even know there was a terrorist attack. This happens constantly in big media. And now you can see how this is a massive gift to China. There's no pressure on Beijing, no focus, no nothing. Democrats, and to some extent Republicans, are tripping all over themselves, screaming about AIPAC, a bipartisan lobbying group that supports U.S. ties with Israel as part of the effort to keep democracies alive in the world. It's the leading talking point that many Democratic candidates in current races have, and it's working. This disturbing Senate candidate in Maine, Graham Plattner, who has the record of doing so many awful things, he comes back to it constantly. No matter what anyone points out about him and his record having nothing to do with that stuff, he goes straight to AIPAC and screaming genocide, while ignoring the actual genocides going on in the world right now. If you're new to this show, I'll mention that I've done episodes explaining how what's been happening in Gaza is definitively not genocide, as in literally based on the definition of the word. Our media is fueling this, associating Jews and Israel with outsized influence and all this money. They don't mention the incomparably bigger spending by anti-democratic forces from China to Iran to Qatar to Russia and others, flowing through all of our national systems in the United States. And similar things are happening in other Western countries. Lobbying, politics, education, and more. There's something I've been thinking about while tying up this episode for you. There is a crazy actress I've mentioned in the past. Her name is Hannah Einbinder. She co-stars in a very popular show while pushing all of the libels about Israel, everything she ever hears. She recently complained in an interview that while she's off promoting some new project she's doing, she knows that she'll be up against what she called dark money that wants to stop her from talking about big bad Israel. It is madness. Imagine having everything people want out of Hollywood and using your platforms to push vicious lies and still seeing and portraying yourself as a victim. Here's my message to her, to all of the people in politics and talking heads and podcasters who are constantly screaming about this imaginary stuff. There is dark money. It's fueling you. If you actually cared about what you claim to care about, you would wake up and understand how you have been serving as useful idiots. All right, folks, as always, I want to know what you think. Let me know. There are two great ways to reach me. The best is through the newsletter, and the second is through a form at my website. I designed it that way strategically. It's working so well. It keeps out the haters and spammers and makes sure that you can get through to me. I see every message. Before you go, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review, and send this episode to everyone you have ever met. But for real, send it to someone who you think will find their mind opened, even a little bit. And a big thank you to Salih for sharing what he shared today. I look forward to hearing from you, and I will see you next week.